This video has been sponsored by Describe. More on that later. Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Welcome to my Druid spell series. I've been doing this series to highlight the Druid spell list, which I often find underrated or oversimplified. In this series I've covered everything from cantrips to 5th level spells up to now. Today I'll be going over 6th level spell options, so, we're getting up there. The lists are now starting to get smaller, and they're going to get smaller yet before we're done. The spell Flesh to Stone was added to the Druid spell list as an optional class feature in Tash's Cauldron of Everything. So, I'll be reviewing it in this video, but if you're not playing with optional class features, you won't find it on the original Druid spell list. If you like these videos and would be interested in supporting this channel, you can do so if you check the link in the video description. Patrons of this channel get to see these videos early and without YouTube ads. And my top level patrons can join me and play some D&D every month. Today I want to thank these top level patrons: Nick Simmons, Pedro Davaca, Philip Martin, Philip Glavorgian, Robbies, Rohit, Ryan Squire, Safes, Sajin Abraham, Scott Ballantyne, and Scott Dunnington. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. I will be using my standard rating system for these spells. If I rank a spell as red, that means I'm not recommending the spell. The spell may just be a bad spell, or it may just not be good enough for the level for me to recommend. If I rank a spell as orange, I think it's overly circumstantial. It's probably useful some of the time if you know those circumstances are going to come up. But if you're not, I wouldn't normally probably prepare it. A purple spell, I think, is just fine. It generally does what it should do, and I think it's a reasonable preparation for the level. If I rank a spell as green, I'm saying it is a good spell. I think that green spells are above average, and I recommend them for preparation. And if I rank a spell as blue, I'm basically saying it's pretty much a must-have. I mean, these are the best spells in the game, and you want to grab them whenever you can. If you are colorblind, I include stars to make it easier for you to see. So if I rank a spell as red, I'll give it 1 star. If I rank it as orange, 2, purple, 3, green, 4, and blue, 5. Also announce the rating of every spell, so if you're just listening, you're set. So let's talk about 6th level spells. Our first spell is Bones of the Earth. With an action, we cast a spell on 6 5-foot diameter circles on the ground we can see within 120 feet of us. These circles must either be clear or contain a creature of medium size or smaller. From these places, 6 pillars of stone rise up 30 feet into the air. There's no concentration required, and the pillars are basically permanent, though they can be destroyed with 30 hit points each, but they can't be dispelled. If a pillar is destroyed, it creates an area of difficult terrain 20 feet across. If the rubble is cleared, which takes 1 minute per 5-foot section, the terrain is no longer difficult, so that's something that's not going to happen in combat, at least for sure. If any pillar does rise under a creature, that creature gets a dexterity saving throw or is lifted to the height of the pillar. The creature can choose to fail the saving throw if they actually want to be lifted. If the pillar contacts a ceiling or other obstacle, a creature on the pillar takes 66 bludgeoning damage and they're restrained, as they're kind of pinned between the pillar and the ceiling. And if they are, they can use their action to attempt a strength or dexterity check against the spell's DC in order to free themselves, though they have to move off the pillar, which could include a 30-foot fall. We can upcast a spell. If we do, we gain 2 additional pillars per spell level. Okay, so how do we use this spell? Well, there's a number of ways we can. First, we could just make a 30-foot wall if we put the pillars together, in any shape we like, and it's a non-concentration wall. I mean, it's not very big, but it's a non-concentration wall. Second, we can make an even bigger prison for a bigger creature. It's going to need to be at least huge or gargantuan, and if we space out the pillars, we can set them so that the creature can't squeeze through, and if they destroy a pillar, not only does it eat up their attack, but they also have now difficult terrain to deal with. Third, we can use this as a way to damage and restrain up to 6 creatures at a time, dexterity save for the lot of them, and any that fail take damage and are restrained at the top of a 30-foot pillar. This use requires we have a ceiling or something to restrain them against. Fourth, we can use this to get allies out of trouble. We move them 30 feet upwards, likely out of the reach of most enemy attacks. But if we do this, remember that the pillar can be destroyed and then they could be coming down the hard way. Fifth, we can use this to block a hallway or a passageway. If we do this, depending on the width of the passageway, we may be able to make this multiple columns thick, meaning blocked enemies may be looking at 60 or 90 hit points bashing to chip their way through. And finally, we can use it just to create things like cover, right? Especially if we're doing things like ranged attacks, we're often looking for things to pop in and out of to give us cover, and these would do that. So the downsides here, first, it's only targeted on the ground, so not much use against flying creatures unless they're low to the ground. And yeah, that's about it. There's really not a lot of downsides. It's one action, no concentration, no duration. You can make walls, mass damage, debuffing, prisons. This is a pretty flexible spell, pretty strong, and good battlefield control. I'm rating it green because of the limit of being on the ground only, and we have seen a number of really good Druid spells that have that same limitation. And these pillars aren't that difficult to destroy, but it still can have a dramatic effect on a lot of combats, and definitely when you're concentrating on something else. So overall, I think this is a good option. With the utterance of ancient words and subtle gesturing, you peel back the veil separating worlds and reach into the fissure. The Fey Spirit comes willingly, guided by your words and your beckoning hand, and as it passes into the material plane, takes the form of a beast of this world, though you know its true form is something else entirely. Our second spell is Conjure Fey, and this is it. This is the highest level summoning spell a Druid can get. Technically, the Druid Grove spell, which we're covering next, does have the summoning tag as well. So Conjure Fey is a 1-minute cast, and it summons a creature for an hour, and you control it as long as you maintain your concentration. This one is like Conjure Elemental last level, where if you lose concentration, it still remains, but it becomes hostile to you. This is one of the summoning spells where it rolls its own initiative, and one additional restriction is placed under this spell, that you can't command the Fey to take actions that violate its alignment. I think that's a pretty small qualifier. Apparently, you can command it to do things that are suicidal. You just can't command the evil Fey to do kind things. Once again, this is a summoning spell where you don't choose the creature. And that is too bad, because if we pick the creature, there are some amazing things we could do with this. Green Hag Coven variants, Dusk Hags, Hags of the Fetid Gaze. Oh, that would be super good. As written though, the DM is picking the creature, and they can pick a Fey of challenge rating 6 or lower, or a beast of challenge rating 6 or lower that the Fey Spirit takes the form of. So that, I think, leaves this potentially weaker than our 5th level Conjure Elemental spell, as that one was likely to have more consistent results. Honestly, a CR5 Elemental is likely tougher than any beast of CR6 or lower. Basically, our top tanky form here is the Annis Hag, which probably is, on par with the standard Elemental when it comes to durability and damage. There is a possibility of some really cool summons here, and a lot of filler that's just hit points and attacks that won't match an Elemental. Tailoring a summon to fit your needs is not really an option. Also, let's talk about size, because it is very possible to go anywhere from medium to gargantuan size here, just within the CR6 bracket. So a wide variance that, again, we don't control. Still, you know what? A CR6 creature is no joke, and sometimes you will get really nasty things like spellcasting Fey with the same number of spells you have. So I can't say this isn't a good spell, but predictability is a bigger issue here than most summoning spells, which is unfortunate. Still though, whatever you get, they'll likely have a decent number of hit points, and either some decent spells or attacks, so I think the spell rates purple. It's not a standout for Druid summoning spells, but you're still very likely to get a decent bang for your buck. Probably, if I'm in a confined space, not the summon I'd pick. As mentioned, the next spell is Druid Grove. We select an area outside or underground between a 30-foot cube and a 90-foot cube in size. After 10 minutes of casting, the area is protected by spirits of nature for 24 hours and it doesn't require concentration. This spell can actually be made permanent if we cast it every day for a year, so something that doesn't really affect PC druids. You can select creatures when you cast a spell, and those creatures are unaffected by the terrain. They don't even have to be within range or sight to select them to be excluded. You can also set up a password that, when spoken, grants immunity. The spell has multiple effects. First, you can fill any spots on the ground with an area of fog. This makes them heavily obscured, and the fog is 10 feet high, and each foot of movement through the fog costs 2 extra feet. So basically you have a third of your movement. If you're granted immunity, the fog is neither slowing nor does it cause obscurement. Second, you can fill any squares on the ground with grasping weeds and vines, like with the entangle spell. Now that sounds good, but it sucks. So by fill, these effects imply that you're either doing one thing or another, so you can't do both the fog and the grasping vines. And here's the thing about entangle. If you aren't in the area when the spell comes into effect, it's just difficult terrain. There's no restrain condition when you enter or anything, so unless some enemy is just hanging around for the 10 minutes you cast a spell, this is just going to be worse and less effective than the fog effect, even for movement. Really, the only reason I can see choosing the grasping undergrowth over the fog is if some effect that would remove fog is an issue, but otherwise, I would say that one's not very good. Third, we can animate up to 4 trees in the area, and they have the statistics of awakened trees, CR2 creature, except they can't speak or leave the area of the spell. Finally, we can include a spell effect in the area. It could be a constant gust of wind, a spike growth, or 2 wind walls. Spike growth plus that fog is going to make movement really, really hard. I mean 1/6 movement through the area. Again, if you're immune, then you're immune, so you can just walk through the spike growth fogged area with no problem. So the effects here, when you start combining them, are pretty potent. Heck, the fog by itself is pretty potent. But the restriction here should be obvious enough. It is a 10-minute casting, which means you're not casting this in combat, and the effect doesn't move. So this basically needs to be purely defensive. To pass through, and even then, it needs to be worth preparing a 6th level spell and expending a 6th level spell slot in order to set up. And I think that lands this safely in orange territory. It is potent, but circumstantial. You've employed your means of divination and intoned the necessary chant, and suddenly, as if you had always known its exact whereabouts, you know the direction of your quarry with ironclad certainty. Our next spell is Find the Path. When we use a minute to cast this divination spell, we select a specific and fixed location we're familiar with on the same plane of existence. For up to 1 day, using our concentration, we know the direction and distance to that location. And while the spell is in effect, if we have a choice of paths, like maybe we're crossing a mountain range or something, then we know the shortest and most direct route to take. And that's it. That's Find the Path. I used to think this spell was pretty useless, honestly, but then I was playing in a campaign where the big enemy had a fortress hidden on an island somewhere in this vast sea. So we cast a spell and we knew where to find it, probably bypassing a lot of hassle investigating to find out where it might be found. So now I think it's occasionally useful, in very specific circumstances. Enough to get an orange rating, I think, though I do think in a number of campaigns this may not come up at all. Our next spell is Flesh to Stone. We spend an action to cast a spell at a creature we can see within 60 feet. Assuming the creature is made of flesh, it makes a Constitution saving throw or it's restrained. If the creature makes their saving throw, nothing happens and the spell is lost. If it did fail the saving throw at the end of its next turn, it makes another Constitution saving throw and continues to do so until it's either made or failed the save 3 times total. If it makes 3 saving throws, the spell ends. If it fails 3 saving throws, it's petrified for as long as we maintain concentration on the spell. If it is petrified when the duration expires, which is 1 minute, and we haven't lost concentration in that time, then it's petrified indefinitely. So potentially, this spell can have a dramatic effect. But practically, what this does, at least from a combat perspective, is it's a single target restraining spell that requires concentration and is negated on a successful saving throw. I mean, nobody is being petrified for at least 3 rounds, and probably longer than that unless they fail every single saving throw. This is also going to require your concentration for the entire combat, unless it fails entirely or it ends earlier. So, I'm not a big fan of single target spells that do nothing if the enemy makes their saving throw. Even more so, though, if they provide a constitution saving throw, and even more so if they use their concentration. Oh, and even more so if they're a high level spell. And in the end, for likely the rest of the combat, we're just talking about restrained. And I mean, restrained is no picnic, but we could restrain creatures with a first level spell, even multiple creatures. So I just don't think this is good. I'm ranking it red. I like the idea of turning enemies to stone, but this is too hard to land, and even if it does land, it takes too long to make it permanent to be practically effective. The next spell is Heal. You use an action, pick a creature within 60 feet that isn't a construct or undead, and they immediately regain 70 hit points. If they're blinded, deafened, or suffering any disease, those also end. We can upcast a spell, and if we do so, it increases the amount of healing by 10 points per spell slot level. I don't think that's a huge deal, like a full spell level for 10 more hit points, but immediate healing to a single target with a good amount of hit points is really useful, and it wasn't really an option up to now. I mean, Cure Wounds spell, upcast to 6th level, would likely heal less than half as many hit points, and that would require touch. And in between Cure Wounds and Heal, there's just not any good single target immediate heals. Personally, I consider Heal a must-have. I find it's pretty much always dramatic, and as I mentioned in a previous video, damage is usually not taken evenly between party members, so keeping that target healthy is a big deal. A fighter of 11th level is probably looking at 90 or 100 hit points altogether, so 70 hit points in one shot is a lot of healing. This is a blue spell, in my opinion, and is very likely the first spell of 6th level that I grab with Druid. It is worth preparing at 11th level, and it is worth preparing even at higher levels. And you know what? When I consider again with the upcasting, although I don't think a spell level for 10 hit points is a great deal, Druids are going to have a couple sparse levels here, so, we may not have as many options for our 7th and 8th level slots anyways. Your companions look on expectantly as your long mantra comes to a close, the gem-encrusted bowl abruptly beginning to shake and quiver without being touched. All at once, in a manner that twists the eye for a moment, the bowl bursts forth a magnificent feast beyond all reasonable imagining. An 8-course dinner featuring food and drink, both familiar and exotic for the choosing. Such a repast can only hearten you against even the direst circumstances to come. Our next spell is Hero's Feast. We require 10 minutes to cast a spell, as well as a costly material component of 1,000 gold piece value, which the spell consumes. And then the spell creates a feast for up to 12 creatures. After the spell is complete, an hour is needed to consume the feast. A creature that consumes the feast gets all kinds of stuff. First, they're cured of any poisons or disease. Then we get a bunch of stuff that lasts for 24 hours. Their hit point maximum increases by 2d10, and they gain the same number of hit points. They gain full immunity to poison and being frightened, and they make all wisdom saving throws with advantage. So that is a lot of stuff and good stuff. And I'll tell you, giving the entire party fear and poison immunity, as well as advantage on wisdom saving throws, shuts down or diminishes significantly a good number of challenges. This would be broken levels of good if it weren't for that material component. Unless you have so much gold that you don't need to worry about it, you just can't normally be spending 1,000 gold every day of adventuring. So the material component cost downgrades this from blue to orange. This is really powerful and potent, but you need to pick and choose when to cast it because of the cost. If you're going into a really big challenge, especially if you know poison, fear, or any wisdom save is going to be a factor, I would do this if I can afford it. Next up, Investiture of Flame. The Druid uses an action to cast a spell, and for up to 10 minutes using concentration, their body is covered in flames. So what does it do? Well, first off, you shed light, bright for 30 feet and dim for 30 feet more. Second, you gain immunity to fire damage and resistance to cold damage. Third, any creature that moves within 5 feet of you or ends its turn there takes a d10 fire damage. And finally, you can use your action to create a line of fire 15 feet long and 5 feet wide. Each creature in the line makes a dexterity saving throw or takes 4d8 fire damage. If they make the saving throw, they take half damage. So, going one at a time. First, the light is nothing, really. It's a lantern. The immunity to fire and resistance to cold could be very useful. We can get resistance with a first level spell, but immunity is something we haven't had an option for before now. The d10 fire damage, I mean, that's like a third of a cantrip's worth of damage at this level. Also, a creature has to either move into the area or end its turn in the area, so unless we're forcing movement, an enemy who doesn't want to trigger it doesn't. Then finally the action to make a short line of fire for 48 damage. I'm just not sure that's worth your action. Your cantrips do similar damage, and the range is so short here, it's small enough you're unlikely to hit multiple targets. So this is mostly stuff that either has no real value or we're unlikely to use. But one thing that was significant here is fire immunity. And that could be really good, but is it concentration good? I mean, we can get resistance without concentration with a 4th level spell for the same duration. Still, full immunity can be a lot better than resistance. But this is a 6th level spell requiring concentration. That kind of spell should give us pretty dramatic results. I just don't think this is dramatic very often, unless fire immunity is going to be huge. In that case, I could see casting it. Good enough to squeak an orange rating. The next spell is Investiture of Ice. These investiture spells are all pretty similar in that they're all in action to cast. They all affect only our Druid, with up to 10 minutes duration using concentration, and they all have multiple effects. In this case, we get immunity to cold, resistance to fire. You can move across snow or ice difficult terrain without extra movement. The ground 10 feet around you is treated as difficult terrain, and you can create a 15-foot cold line. The damage does 4d6 and provides constitution for a saving throw, but if it fails, its speed is halved until your next turn. So all in all, this is really similar to Investiture of Flame. You get immunity to cold, resistance to fire, so that's reversed, and based on what I said on the previous spell, that should make it clear this is going to end up being orange, because we can move across snow or ice difficult terrain, whatever. Difficult terrain around us, 6th level spell with concentration, that's small. And another line effect, probably no better than a cantrip, except in this case it's arguably even worse than the fire one, but that really doesn't change my rating. If we're not going to use the action, we're not going to use the action. It doesn't matter how bad it is. So the spell gets orange, mainly for the option for cold immunity being unique at this point in our career. The next spell is Investiture of Stone. There's 4 of these, by the way, 1 for each element, and these are not great spells. 1 action, 10 minutes concentration, self-only, just like all the rest. We gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. We can use our action to have all creatures within 15 feet of us on the ground make a dexterity saving throw or be knocked prone. This, unfortunately, does have friendly fire. And we can move across difficult terrain of earth or stone without extra movement. We can also move through solid earth or stone, but we can't end our movement inside it. I have to say, it's been a while since I've revisited this spell, and honestly, it does seem better to me than the first 2 spells. First off, we're getting the effects of stone skin, but with no costly component. Then we're moving through stone and earth, and that could be pretty useful. Now, the action for the Saver Prone, well, I do think friendly fire could be a problem, because we're restricted to this occurring around us, and when we're talking 6th level spells, I'm not sure knocking prone is all that impressive at this point anyways. Once again, is this worth spending a 6th level spell slot, a preparation, and our concentration? Maybe. I think sometimes. I think orange is the fair rating here. It's not something I would be casting normally, but I can see this having occasional value. The last of these spells is Investiture of Wind. If memory serves, I've always found this the least impressive of the lot. Same stuff, 10 minutes, concentration, self only, one action to cast. Ranged weapon attacks against us have disadvantage. Yeah, that's nothing at this point. Warding Wind is a second level spell. You gain a flying speed of 60 feet. Now, in the case of Druids, I'll note we haven't gotten a fly spell before now. So that's actually significant, even if the level of the spell is outrageous for self-only flight. And we can use our action to create a 15-foot cube of wind within 60 feet of us. This gives a Constitution saving throw where they take 2d10 bludgeoning damage and the creature is pushed 10 feet away from the center of the cube. Half damage and no pushing if the save is successful. Again, I don't know if this is worth our action. Okay, so the ranged attack disadvantage, small stuff. The flying speed is useful, and the action, if you want to do damage, it's terrible. The pushing effect, maybe. So the real question is, do you have a lot of use for the force movement? Because if you don't, then this is self-only fly for a 6th level slot. I think I can justify an orange rating here, but just. If Druids had another fly spell, I think this would have been red, but they don't, so this is really their only option. To be honest though, I'm not a huge fan of any of these investiture spells. That concentration is just such a big requirement, and the action you can take during that time is pretty underwhelming considering the level. Our next spell is Move Earth. This is an action to cast and lasts up to 2 hours using our concentration. 2 hours, by the way, pretty unusual. We normally just see an hour, or then we jump up to 8 hours. When you cast Move Earth, you choose an area of terrain up to 40 feet on a side within 120 feet of you. The terrain must be dirt, sand, or clay. The spell is specific that rock or stone is not valid as a target, though dirt with rocks in it is still okay. You can reshape the dirt, sand, or clay in the area basically however you want. You can create walls, pillars, pits, whatever, though the sizes are limited. But these changes occur very slowly, so 10 minutes later they're complete. During the duration you can select new areas to shape, one every 10 minutes you're concentrating, so potentially 12 areas. So despite this being a one-action casting, it's really kind of functioning like a 10-minute casting. It's not something to cast in combat at all. Then when we're outside combat, we're also really limited in terrain. This is not working on stone, so caves are out, dungeons are out. Anywhere where you're inside is probably out unless you have dirt floors. Generally, this isn't going to be useful to shape walls, ceilings, or floors. I think it's way too circumstantial to prepare normally. Orange because the effects actually can be dramatic and you can shape just a ton of area given the time, but this is circumstantial utility. It's not a standard spell you can expect to be useful on any given day. The next spell is Primordial Ward. You cast this on yourself with one action and it lasts up to a minute using your concentration. During the duration, you have resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder damage. And if you take damage of one of those types, then you can use your reaction to gain immunity to that type of damage, including the damage that just triggered it. If you do so, you lose all the resistances, and the immunity lasts until the end of your next turn, and then the spell is over. And I look at this spell, and you know what? I can't help but think, maybe it should have just been Absorb Elements, except it gives immunity, and it's 6th level. Because in this case, you're using your action to cast this. Then you have this tiny duration, 1 minute. So you better cast this in combat, and then you have to concentrate for the duration. And during the duration, then you need to be targeted with one of those damage types. And then you use your reaction, and then you get immunity for a round. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the Investiture of Flame or Ice spells, but at least you're getting 10 minutes of immunity out of them. This is like immunity for a round, but you have to use your action before to set this up in the same combat. I get that there's more flexibility in damage types here, but this is a hard spell to use. And should your action come up and you think you might need this soon, then you better not be concentrating on anything else either. So I don't think this even makes orange. I'm giving this a red rating. Yes, immunity can be a big deal, but there are way too many steps to set this up to get one round of immunity, never mind it requiring concentration. With words that mix prayer and an ancient language of magic, the spell reaches out to the celestial sphere and opens a pathway to a foundational force of the universe, without which, quite literally, all the world would lie in darkness. You look at the glow coming from between your fisted fingers and throw out your open palm, directing the brilliant power of the sun in a searing line of radiance. Our next spell is Sunbeam. One action to cast, and you create a line of sunlight that's 5 feet wide and 60 feet long that extends from you. And you can create a new line of sunlight using your action on each of your turns for up to 1 minute using your concentration. Any creature in the line when you cast a spell makes a Constitution saving throw, and they take 68 radiant damage and are blinded until your next turn on a failed saving throw, or half the damage and not blinded if they succeed on the saving throw. Undead and oozes have disadvantage on this saving throw. So compare this action each turn to the actions you would get for any of the investiture spells, and we can see just a dramatic difference. Also, while this spell is in effect, you shed bright light in a 30-foot radius around you and dim light for an additional 30 feet, and this light is sunlight. So overall, you know what? This is okay. I think my opinion on this spell has improved with time. The damage isn't great, but it is every turn if we use our action, and we have the blinded condition rider. And again, you compare this to the investiture spells to see what you can do with your action, and it's dramatically different. And this spell actually creates sunlight around us, and that can have a negative impact on a number of creature types. Against undead, this is going to be really good. Oozes too, I guess, though I wouldn't expect a lot of ooze battles anymore at this level. But it's also actually pretty good against drow, duergar, or anything else with sunlight sensitivity as well. And if you're not facing any creature that this is unusually good against, well, then it's not a great spell, but you know what? It's still probably okay. I'm ranking this purple. I think that most of the time it's average to low-end average, and then sometimes it's well above average. The next spell is Transport via Plants, which is the next attempt at druids and teleport spells. This requires an action to cast, and you select a plant within 10 feet, and for 1 round, anyone who uses 5 feet of movement to step through the plant teleports to a different plant you designate when you cast a spell. You need to have seen or touched it before, and it needs to be somewhere on the same plane of existence. So combat teleport, this is not. It doesn't restrict who uses it, it requires movement to use, never mind the plant restriction. As an out-of-combat teleport, well, you know, this is fine. I mean, you need to get to the other side of the world. This can do that as long as you've seen a plant at your destination, or at least near your destination. This is not one of the better teleportation spells. There's no quick escapes here, but as a pure utility spell for long distance travel, it's a reasonable option, so it gets an orange for that, but as a druid, yeah, teleportation just really isn't our strength. Next up, Wall of Thorns. Our druid casts a spell using their action, and for up to 10 minutes using our concentration, a wall of thorns appears on a solid surface within 120 feet of us. Now, is this an actual wall? Well, kind of. We'll get there. First off, the wall is 60 feet long, 10 feet high, and 5 feet thick. Or you can make it into a ring with a 20-foot diameter. Size-wise, this isn't far off Wall of Fire. It's shorter and thicker, and like with Wall of Fire, we're getting a straight line or a ring. Also, like Wall of Fire, it blocks sight. When the wall appears, anyone in the area makes a dexterity saving throw, and they take 78 piercing damage on a failed saving throw, or half on a successful save. So, the wall test. Can a creature just walk through this? Well, technically yes. Though each foot of movement does cost quadruple, so 20 feet of movement to get through a 5-foot section. Creature also takes damage if it enters the wall or it ends its turn in the wall. So, can the average enemy walk through? Well, yes. Not easily or without damage, but they can. So, as far as I'm concerned, this isn't really a wall. But is it good? Well, I think it really depends how much mileage you've been getting out of Wall of Fire. Because I think this is very similar to that spell, but more effective. It does damage when you cast it, and then you can use forced movement to have it do damage again, and again, like with Wall of Fire. If that damage occurs once, this is not good. If it occurs twice, it's okay. If it occurs 3 times or more, then that is a whole lot of damage. I mean 21d8. We also get the slowed movement too, and that's decent, and the damage type is reliable. Also, if you can restrain or grapple somebody so they're stuck in the wall, that can be effective too. So, not a real wall, but reasonable repeat damage effect if we control enemy movement. It's purple. I think it's worth the 2 levels over Wall of Fire. And if you like that spell and you've been getting use out of it, you might want this spell as well. One moment you are a corporeal, solid creature. The next you are the wind, becoming a gaseous mist. You spring upward, then rush forward at an incredible speed. We finish up 6 level spells with Windwalk. This is 1 minute to cast, so we're not casting this in combat, and we select up to 10 willing creatures within 30 feet, and they, as well as ourselves, take on gaseous form for up to 8 hours, no concentration required. While in this form, we each have a flying speed of 300 feet and resistance from non-magical damage. The only actions available to us are the dash action, or an action to begin our transformation back to our original form, though this transformation from the gaseous form to our original form takes 1 minute to complete, during which time we are incapacitated and unable to move. If we do return to our original form, as long as we are within that 8-hour duration, we can change back to the gaseous form again. Once again, it requires a minute. Then if we're flying when the spell ends, we descend at a rate of 60 feet per round for 1 minute, and if we're not on the ground by that time, then we fall any remaining distance. Not something I'd expect to happen. You need to be over 600 feet above the ground for this to be any concern. So this spell has been set up to basically ensure we're not going to make any use of this in combat, with 1 minute to take gaseous form and another to return to our normal forms, and being able to take only the dash action while in that form. That said, you can use it multiple times between combats, as long as it fits within the 8-hour duration. So I see basically 2 main ways to use this spell. The first is long-range travel. With these kinds of movement speeds and this duration, a party can travel basically 10 times the normal rate. Furthermore, they should be able to travel pretty safely as well. The other use I can see is movement between combat and access between combat. I mean, even in a dungeon crawl, it's a way you could seep under doorways, fly over obstacles, and with movement speeds of 300, we could likely bypass some combats as well. Still, this is utility. It's pretty strong utility though, and frankly, if you can spare the slot, it's a fairly handy buff to have on the party, just giving them another movement option when they need it, or the advantages of the gaseous form. Speaking of the gaseous form, by the way, that is a 3rd level spell that affects a single target, uses concentration, and provides a fly speed of 10. So this is a pretty massive upgrade, probably deserving of a 3-level boost. I don't think this is super powerful, but it's definitely handy. I think it's usually going to be the better long-range travel option to transport via plants unless the distance is really long. And I think this spell rates a solid purple. If you take this and use it, I think you'll get reasonable value from casting it. I'd like to take a moment and thank the sponsor of this video, Describe. Describe is a service that provides box text, such as the box text I included in this video, for your game. And they don't just have spells. They have places, monsters, and characters as well, and they have a cartographer. These maps are, of course, look great, but they also include terrain that has the Describe box text included. So let me show you how that works. Here's a new map that's been included. In fact, there's several new maps here. This one is, in fact, the first time I've seen it. So we can just download the map, or we can go to the interactive map. And if we go to the interactive map, we're going to find that each area is highlighted with box text that describes the location. So when the characters go to there and they get to the north entrance, you can describe. A few barrels sealed with crackling pitch sit near the entry, perhaps for someone to pick up, perhaps to be readied for transport. Any tracks have been blown away by the desert wind, circling in here and piling sand against the south wall. If you click the link in the video description or the top pinned comment, it'll take you to Describe. And if you want to use their content, you don't even have to pay. They have a free service. It provides a fair amount of content that you can use without charge. But if you do choose to subscribe, please use the coupon code TreantMonk to get 10% off your initial subscription. And that's our 6th level spells. This isn't the strongest level of spells we've had, but there are some good spells here, and the list still has a number of options. Join me for our next episode where we discuss 7th level spells. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I will talk to you soon.